So now for the best part of the evening, and we're going to get right to it. For those of you who were here last year, you remember we had John Fund and we had Steve Moore, and they were entertaining, but also a little bit prophetic about what might happen with the election, what the benefits and the dangers of either a Trump or Clinton presidency. Well, for those of you who weren't here, we're actually going to play some of what they said last year and ask them to respond to it. So back for an encore performance. First, let me introduce somebody who absolutely doesn't need an introduction, but I will anyway. The national affairs columnist for National Review and probably one of the most prolific writers, John Fund. Next, we have that unique combination of policy geek and wildly entertaining, and I have had the honor of being his warm-up act, Steve Moore from the Heritage Foundation. Thanks. And then, of course, somebody who needs no introduction. You guys call him almost everything. I call him boss, John Caldera.
Thank you. All right, can you hear me? I've been looking forward to this for so long because I kept thinking about, it was only about a year ago when we all got together, and it was unreal to think that we were going to have a nominee of Donald Trump. A lot of us were trying to get our head around it. Some of us were excited about it. Some of us were scared about it. But there was no way this guy was going to win. And we invited these two guys on to talk about this incredible, disruptive, wonderfully disruptive year. And I kept thinking about what some of these guys said. I miss Tim Russert. I forget what Meet the Press. But he would do this terrible thing of showing what people said right in front of them before they spoke. And so we're going to do a little of that tonight. So let's jump into this from 1 year ago today. Let's start off with some bit of what John Fund had to say about the candidate, Donald Trump.
Character still counts. We impeached Bill Clinton because he was of bad character. Donald Trump has the potential to do good things for this country. He has the potential to win. But just remember, if we elect Donald Trump, we are changing the nature of the kind of person of character we are electing to the presidency of the United States. And we are not only gaining some things, we're also giving something up. I stand by what I said. I said he had the potential to win. I was wrong. I thought he had a 35% chance to win the day before the election. I said that on TV. I was wrong. On the other hand, everyone else thought he had a 5% chance of winning. Except for Steve Moore. I give Steve credit.
That was short and sweet to the point. I like that. All right. Let's find out what Steve Moore said a full year ago.
Here is the good news. That X factor, charisma, whatever you want to call it, Hillary does not have it. She doesn't have it. She is the ice queen, and that's why I think she's going to be defeated. Donald Trump is going to win this election. He's going to win I think he's going to win 35 states. I think he's going to win a very big victory. But I do think Donald Trump can crash through what's called the blue wall, which is these states that the Democrats have dominated year after year after year, election after election. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin. Trump can win all those states, and I'd even make the case Trump could possibly win in New York. It changes the map.
I guess the first question I would ask Steve, I need a little investment advice as well. All right, I remember this a year ago, and I was like, I know Steve, and Steve sometimes believes some wacky stuff. I didn't think this could happen. What did you know that so many of us did not?
I love being right. I just love being right. And I have to say, please don't tell my wife this, but election night was the best night of my life. So I was.
By the way, Steve.
I haven't stopped smiling.
By the way,
since
Steve
then.
and I spent it together. And
Oh,
Steve,
yeah, we were at PAX.
I knew Trump had won before you did. Remember?
Yeah, John kept saying at 10 o'clock Eastern, it's over, it's over. And I'm like, John, you're going to jinx it, you know. Look, I think Trump, there was a Trump voter out there. We talked about this last year, about people who were profoundly unhappy with Washington, that believed that Washington was corrupt, incompetent, and selfish. And they were right. And I would say, by the way, I look out at this crowd. Who knew there were so many deplorable people here in the state of Colorado? So it's, but actually, I thought of that because I think that what killed Hillary more than anything else was that deplorable comment when she said people who want to vote for Donald Trump are racist, sexist, xenophobes, Islamophobes. Remember that?
Yeah,
and it
we
killed
are.
her. It killed her. Exactly. No, but you know what was so interesting about that is that's what working class Americans think the liberal elite thinks about them. Liberal elites, ladies and gentlemen, think that they're culturally, morally, and intellectually superior to working class Americans, and you know what? They're not.
Well, I almost never promote another book that not by a friend of mine or myself. But I'll make an exception for the book Shattered, which is by two journalists who followed the Hillary Clinton campaign and were given complete access to it with the proviso that they wouldn't quote anyone until after the election. Very similar to the John Heilemann and Mark Halperin books. Their book is just out. There are two kinds of books that you want to read. The first is one that challenges your basic core beliefs, makes you rethink things, see things in a new way, brings you new facts. And the second kind of book is one that validates every single one of your prejudices, every single one of your... Here's what this book does. This book shows that Hillary Clinton launched in 2015 her presidential campaign, and it was the Titanic. And the only question is when it was going to hit the iceberg. Let me give you just one anecdote from this book, which shows you how bad a candidate Hillary Clinton was. So, cast your mind back to 2008. Hillary Clinton has just lost the Democratic primary to Barack Obama, who famously said that she was likable enough. One of his first great lies. She wasn't. And Hillary Clinton has her meeting after the primaries are over and before the convention, and it's the postmortem. They have to do the autopsy. What went wrong in the campaign? What lessons are we going to learn? Because we're going to run in 2016. So it's a conference table of about 20 people, and they're all around, all of the top campaign people, Podesta, Mandy Grunwald, everybody's there. And Hillary speaks first, because she's first among equals. And she says, well, the first item on the agenda is, I demand the emails of every single person on this campaign, because I'm going to go through them with a fine-tooth comb and find out who the leakers were. And everyone just sort of looks at her, and they suddenly realize she really is paranoid. And she really is obsessed with enemies, foreign and domestic. And that sort of gives you the indication of why Hillary's campaign was propped up by the media and the donors, but it really had very little support among the vast bulk of the American people, because yes, she was the historic first woman to ever be nominated for president, but ultimately it was an empty pantsuit.
You know, throughout our lives, I keep hearing people remember where they were when 9/11 happened. You remember where you were when Lennon was shot.
I was at the World Trade Center.
Yeah, you were. I remember that. And when Kennedy was shot, I wonder if years from now people will go, where were you on election night? And I was with Amy and a few folks over at the Independence Institute, getting ready to drown our sorrows in a lot of liquor, which we do pretty much daily. And we're watching this, and it becomes real, and it doesn't quite hit. And then the flash hit me, which was Hillary is having a meltdown right now, which we now found out she did.
So let me say a word about that, because I forgot, John, you and I were together on election night. We were over at Fox News and watching the returns, and people don't realize what happened on election night, which was so interesting, is that it was by about 1 o'clock in the morning. It was pretty certain. Once Michigan and Pennsylvania came through, we knew we had them. And Hillary would not come out. She would not concede. And what a lot of you may not know, I'm not here to kick Hillary, but it is fun to kick her away.
Yes.
But she was incapable of giving a concession. She locked herself in the bathroom and would not come out. Incidentally, another great story about election night. You and I, at the time, were together at about 6:30 at night on election night. Hillary Clinton's chief pollster went on MSNBC, and she said, based on the exit polling, we believe we have a 95% chance of winning tonight. Isn't that amazing? Sometimes the experts are all wrong. But what was so great was after the results were finally, we finally had the last votes in from Pennsylvania. I knew we had it. I was supposed to go over to the Hilton where Trump had his big event, and I couldn't get within 3 blocks of the thing. There's such a mob scene, and it was so great. I was so happy that night. And I remember the next morning I had to get up early to do a Fox News interview, and this guy, he sees me and I'm walking towards him, and he just intentionally kind of bumps into me and he says, "Hey, he must have recognized me from Fox or something. Hey, you a-hole, I hope you're happy." And I just smiled at him. Yeah, I'm pretty happy. But the greatest part of this, though, so as the stock market, remember on the election night, the stock market collapsed. There was a sell-off of about 600 points. And the reason that the stock market crashed that night was because Hillary would not concede, and the investors were worried that we're going to have another 2000 situation where it would be contested. After she conceded, my favorite moment, though, do you all know who Paul Krugman is, the left-wing economist who writes for that left-wing rag called the New York Times? He went on MSNBC at 7:30 the next morning, the morning after the election. And he was asked, do you remember this, John? He was asked, when will the stock market recover? And he said, never. And then we had the biggest stock market rally in history. Why do people believe these idiots? I mean, and he won a Nobel Prize in economics.
Well, let me tell you the disconnect that occurs in this country with the elites and the pundits. What are the 4 places in this country where elites that think that they shape public opinion hang out? Well, I'll tell you the 4. They're Manhattan Island in New York. There's Washington, D.C., there's San Francisco, and there's Hollywood. Well, let me tell you, this is something you can look up and you can use it with your friends. What is the one thing those 4 places have in common? Donald Trump got 9% of the vote in each one of those 4 places. 9%. Talk about out of touch. The media weren't in a bubble, they were under a cloud cover.
You know, John, to follow up on that, I mean, there's no question, when I was on the campaign trail, and I debate liberals, they kept saying stuff like, why are people so angry? What are they so angry about? I mean, everything is so wonderful in America. Because these are people who live in Washington. I have an office in the Heritage Foundation. I look out, all I see is cranes. Washington, D.C. is booming. 3 out of the 5 wealthiest counties in America are in or around Washington, D.C. And you know what? The American people finally figured it out. How can 3 of the 5 wealthiest counties in America be in Washington? We don't produce anything, right? All we produce is rules, regulations, politicians, lawyers, and lobbyists. And finally, John, Americans figured it out. You all send us $4 trillion, and we send you $3 trillion back. And we get rich off of it. And that was the contempt that the American people had for Washington, D.C., and good riddance. I mean, it's a healthy thing that Americans see how corrupt Washington, D.C. is.
On election night, not only was I seeing in my mind's eye Hillary having this meltdown and throwing things, which apparently she did, but sometime it hit me that in this hotel suite, people talking and kibitzing and panicking, off in the corner was, in my mind at least, Bill Clinton slowly sipping a double scotch when the realization hits him, I can finally get a divorce. Let's continue on with some of the things that were said.
Well, just remember, we still have Chelsea running for Congress to worry about.
That's it.
Hey, John, I just want to tell one fun story from the campaign, if I might. And it gets to this point about the disconnect that John was talking about between Washington, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and the rest of the country. One of the places they sent me at the end of the campaign was Ohio, because in Ohio, obviously, as goes Ohio, so goes the nation. And I'll never forget this. I flew into Dayton, Ohio, and they had me go about an hour straight west towards the Indiana border. And for those, I'm a Midwestern boy, but I didn't realize how agricultural, you get outside of the cities like Cleveland and Cincinnati. Ohio is a very rural state. And we were driving, and my driver, Joey, took me, and we're going through these little towns. It's like Mayberry, RFD, one little town after another. A lot of these towns didn't even have Burger King, McDonald's. A lot of them didn't even have a stoplight. And all I saw for the 45 minutes we were driving, every second or third house, Trump, 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 Trump. It was the most amazing thing. It's one of the first times that, God, we could actually win this thing. And I remember saying to my driver, Joey, when we got close to the place we were going, I said, Joey, this is unbelievable. We've been driving for 45 minutes, and I haven't seen one Hillary sign. Well, sure enough, 2 minutes later, we go around the corner, and about 4 houses down, there's one of those big blue Hillary signs. Says, Joey, never mind, there's one. Well, we get closer. Joey says, hey, Steve, take a closer look at that. It said Hillary for prison. And, the point is that you look at those areas outside of the city, look, Hillary won, 80% of the inner city vote? The suburbs were kind of toss-up. When you got outside of the cities, it was Trump country. Never seen anything like it. And there's a culture war going on. I mean, this election wasn't just economic. I think it was cultural.
John made some interesting points a year ago on what Trump would need to do in order to win. Let's listen to those, and tell me, did Trump do these things? So let's roll this one from John.
But if the candidate proposing change doesn't have a credible, consistent plan that people think he will actually follow rather than abandon at the next whim, the easiest thing for people to do in this country is not vote. You take 100 eligible voters, only 60 in an average election will vote for president. I think we could have, if we have the lowest voter turnout in presidential history because we have the evil of two lessers, I will guarantee you more Republicans will not vote than Democrats. After all, Democrats know how to invent new voters. I wrote books on this. So that Trump can win, Steve. He can. But he's got to convince people that it's not just the politics of the personality.
I agree.
It's not just, it's actually a plan that he probably will actually deliver on.
I tell you what, before you respond to that, we've got one more that you said he needed to do or could be possible. So let's just play the next one as well.
I'll make a prediction that there's at least a 1 in 4 chance that either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump are not the nominees of their party. Everything has been a surprise in this campaign election year so far. There are more surprises coming. Hillary has to win the FBI primary. She lost it.
So did Trump put together a plan that was obviously who won? Was it because of the plan?
Several elements. Supreme Court was very important. How many here voted primarily in the Supreme Court? A fair number. He put out a list of 21 names saying, I will draw from one of these 21 names. He picked Neil Gorsuch. I think almost everyone in this room would say that was a home run. He did come out with a tax plan. There's someone on this stage who had something to do with that plan.
I try not to take credit.
Exactly. I knew you'd say that. And the plan was credible, and it was about growth, and it was about opportunity. And the third thing he said is, in addition to the political correctness, which I think was part of the revolt, I think he went after regulation in a big way. And as a businessman, he had credible reasons to say, I know what regulation has done to retard jobs and economic growth in this country, and I'm going to take a buzzsaw to regulation. So I think he did not have the kind of detailed plans the media wanted or people are used to. I grant you that. But it was enough of a plan to say this is going to be different from what we have, and we'll go for it.
How's he doing on that plan?
Tax plan?
Let's talk tax plan first, but then regulation.
Just one thing about Gorsuch. I think a lot of Americans voted for Donald Trump because of the Supreme Court. I agree with you, John. And it's so interesting because the left is doing all these first 100 days. And I switched over from Fox News to CNN, so I'm with fake news now. And so every night they're just, oh, what a horrible first 100 days this has been for Donald Trump. I mean, disaster after disaster. And, I think about this and I'm like, wait a minute. It's like saying to a guy who hits a grand slam with 2 outs in the 9th inning, well, you only had 1 hit. I mean, for nothing, right? I mean, look, what was most important was getting this Supreme Court nominee, right? I mean, that was the single most important thing, and we're going to get another one in the next 2 years. So that's big. On the tax plan, I am so happy with the plan that Trump came out with yesterday. This is exactly what he campaigned on. This is exactly what Larry Kudlow and I helped outline for him 9 months ago. We're going to cut those business tax rates from the highest in the world to the lowest. We've had so many companies leave the United States. We've got such a giant problem with our business taxes. I mean, my God, there's 2 French candidates now for president in France. Both of them want to cut their corporate rate. We have a higher corporate tax rate and business tax rate, ladies and gentlemen, than Russia, Sweden, and France. I mean, what's wrong with this picture? So we're going to bring those down. We're going to simplify the system so 90% of Americans can just itemize. You're not going to have to itemize your deduction, just take the standard deduction. And by my calculations, if we can get this tax cut through, and I think, by the way, I think we're going to get this done this year. We're going to get Obamacare repealed this year, ladies and gentlemen. It's gone. And when we do that, I think we increase economic growth by 1 percentage point. That's a big difference. Go from 1.8% to 3% growth. That's a giant difference. It's going to reduce the deficit. It's going to reduce poverty. It's going to feel really good to people. It's been 10 years, by the way, 10 years that without 1 year without a 3% growth rate. So we're going to crack through that.
I'll just add to what Steve said about the Supreme Court. In case you ever play this tape back again from tonight, some other century, the 80% chance there'll be another Supreme Court vacancy this year.
This year?
And
This year.
who will be retiring?
Kennedy?
Or is there an assassination you know about that we don't?
Anthony Kennedy is 80 years old. He has some health concerns. He has told friends he wants to leave the court. And he also told friends the ultimate capper to his career, and he's already done this because the Supreme Court has heard arguments all month, to have sat on the court with a former clerk of his, Neil Gorsuch. This has never happened in the history of the Supreme Court, that a sitting justice has served with a clerk whom he named to work with him in his youth.
It also speaks to when we talk about infrastructure, it's not just what we do here in Colorado, but
The Federalist Society has been an amazing success story.
You know, these are the organizations, and Joe Smith, one of our trustees, has been a huge supporter of and active in the Federalist Society. But it's these groups that think not just about the next election, but about the next decade. And without Leo Leonard putting together that list in the Federalist Society,
By the
we
way,
wouldn't have that.
you know, careers go in different ways. I mean, I'm happy with my career. But I have to tell you, in 1992, I wrote a term paper on term limits, which had just been voted on in Colorado. You remember Terry Considine.
And Dennis
was involved.
Polhill from the
And by the
Independence
way, I am
Institute.
so pleased to always come back to Colorado. This state has been so good to me. There are people here tonight who my respect and admiration for show no bounds. Hank Brown is here, the most decent and thoughtful member I think ever served in the United States Senate. Vince Carroll, who we just were reminiscing of our trip to East Germany 35 years ago and how we were there just before the wall fell. Sherry Williams from the Leadership Program for the Rocky. You have wonderful leaders here in Colorado. But here's what happened in 1992. I wrote a term paper on term limits for the Cato Institute. Cato brought me to Washington to speak on my paper. Another paper was discussed at that meeting. A Harvard Law School student had written a term paper on term limits. His name was Neil Gorsuch. So I like to think, hey, I served on a panel with Neil Gorsuch. You know, who knows?
It was all you.
Maybe we'll bring back that term limits argument before the Supreme Court that went 5-4.
That'd be terrific. One of the most enjoyable parts of all this has been watching the media implode. I take no end of joy for this. You didn't either. Let's go back a year ago and hear what Steve said.
He's taught us something. He taught Republicans something. A couple of things. Number one, you can stand up to the media. You know, and I love the fact that he stood up to the media and he took it right to them, and he said, we're not going to genuflect in front of you people. And people, conservatives respond in a very positive way to that. And I think hopefully other Republicans have learned. You know, what's the old saying that I always know that Republicans are the pro-life party because they always find themselves in the fetal position. You know, finally we've got a Republican who's not in the fetal position.
The media freak out amplified, which I didn't think was possible after the election. It has been wonderful. Let's start over here. Are you surprised? Do you enjoy it as much as I do? I love to listen to NPR to hear the sheer panic in their voice every day.
Politico magazine took the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which tells you where jobs are, who's working where and what, where they live, and they just constructed a demographic picture of the news media. Two numbers from that. 90% of the people who work in the internet publishing industry live in counties Hillary Clinton carried. If you add in newspapers and other publications, 75% of the working journalists live in counties that Hillary Clinton carried. This is not a media bubble, this is a media force field, preventing any ideas from penetrating this into their brains. Of course, Donald Trump, you can talk about his numbers being historically low for a president 100 days in. Well, he's an extremely polarizing figure. Donald Trump could walk on water and 45% of the people would question it. What they don't tell you is this. Maybe Trump's approval rating is 45%, but when you match him up, do you believe he's being honest and truthful when compared to the news media? He wins by almost 10 points. So normally you would think an industry that has been so discredited that basically they've been labeled fake news and a large chunk of the American people believe that charge, you'd think there'd be some rethinking. Instead, there's this insane doubling down. Of course we're right. The Washington Post's new motto is, what is it? The death of democracy. I have to say, if the news media doesn't wake up and realize that it has to understand the rest of the country better, and that its job is to explaining events, not trying to change events, if they don't recognize that, tell you, we're going to see the growth of citizen journalism and journalism done in people's neighborhoods and across the country in a completely different way, because the major news media outlets are going to prove themselves to be dinosaurs.
It's one of the reasons you should always go to CompleteColorado.com. Colorado's Drudge Report every day. Now that you work for the fake news media, have you seen the difference? What's the difference between Fox and CNN?
Well, let me amplify some of the points that John was making. Look, Donald Trump ran against the media, and he won. And the contempt that people have for the media now is universal. I think that the media is so discredited in themselves, it's going to take a long, long time for them to regain any respectability. I mean, the New York Times, remember this, John, about a month before the election, they basically admitted to their readers, we can no longer even pretend to be neutral and unbiased in our coverage because Donald Trump is such a menace to the country. So, but I'll say this about the media, though. Trump used the media so incredibly effectively. I mean, I was working for Rand Paul. He was my first, I'm a libertarian, so I love Rand. And I knew, is anybody from Rand Paul out there? But anyway, we had a lot of great ideas. We thought we were going to get a lot of media, just as his father had, Ron Paul. As soon as Donald Trump announced he was running for president, we could not get a word in edgewise. If you look back at just the newspaper coverage and the nightly news coverage, almost from the day Donald Trump ran until the day he won the election, every single day, he would say outrageous things, but he used the media in an incredibly effective way that just crowded out everybody in that entire Republican field. I remember talking to Jeb Bush. I mean, Jeb Bush spent $100 million. Did you know that? $100 million, and he got virtually no votes. Trump hardly spent any money, but he used the media very effectively.
Well, Steve,
CNN, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, just in terms of the difference between Fox and CNN, I went over to CNN because I truly believe maybe some of these people who've never heard these ideas, could be reached. And by the way, the thing I've learned is most of these people have never been exposed to these ideas. It's unbelievable. It's like when I went to the University of Colorado. Linda Feathers, my friend here, asked me to come out, and so many of these kids. I did 2 events. 1,000 kids each came to them, and a lot of the kids came up to me and said, I've never heard these free market ideas before. Is that unbelievable? Does that speak to how bad the universities are today? So I'm hoping to reach some people who've never heard these ideas, but every time I say something, or make a contention, I am always challenged on it at CNN. And it's typically 4 against 1, and I can deal with those odds.
One of the things the media should have recognized is, of course, Donald Trump has character flaws, and of course he has limitations. We discussed some of that last year. But on issues of, does he know how to market? Does he know how to brand people? Does he know how to label opponents and basically render them radioactive? Can he intimidate people? Can he attract attention to himself? Can he play the magician's trick of the hand is quicker than the eye? There's genius there. I never fully understood Donald Trump until I read a book a few months ago called The Autobiography of P.T. Barnum. He is the modern P.T. Barnum. And P.T. Barnum, of course, was the most successful entrepreneur, and he did high culture. He brought opera singers, but he also did, circus acts. He was the most successful entertainment entrepreneur in America, and what Donald Trump was able to do was turn politics into entertainment, and today that's necessary in part because of the attention spans and, of course, the fact that people are cynical. But I'll just leave you with one thing. P.T. Barnum ends his book by describing his last act as a public life. He went into politics. He became the mayor of New Haven, Connecticut. He opened the first streetcar line in America, got a 10% commission on it too. And he cleaned up New Haven, and he was just about to run for governor of Connecticut when he passed away. Donald Trump was underestimated, just like Ronald Reagan was, so many times, and so was George W. Bush. Because the media focused only on their limitations, they didn't understand there must have been a reason they got here. They never grasped that.
There's a great example of that. Do you all remember about a month ago or so, Trump had one of his first press conferences in the White House with the media, and it was a late afternoon thing, and I had been over at CNN because they wanted me to comment after the press conference was over. And this was remember, John, where he said something, he had made this comment about, I won by a larger margin than anybody since Ronald Reagan, and it was, it was one of Donald Trump's exaggerations. And so one of the reporters said to him, well,
It was Jim Acosta of CNN.
Yeah, he said, Mr. President, in fact, no, this wasn't the closest election. In fact, it was the biggest, landslide. This one was closer, that one's closer. And Trump was so great. He said, well, somebody told me I won by the biggest amount. But anyway, it went on like that, and he was very combative with the media. And at the end of the press conference, I was over at CNN and watching all the news media. And remember, John, everybody in the media said, this is the worst press conference I've ever seen for a president. He was unprepared. He's doing a disservice to the presidency with the answers that he gives and so on. And there was just contempt for Trump. The next 3 days, I went out on the road. I went to Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and people came up to me and go, wasn't Trump just great in that press conference? So there's just a disconnect between the way the media sees him and the way average Americans see him, and the media can't figure that out. That's what's so strange. They can't figure out why people like Trump, but they love the fact that he's so combative with Trump. One other quick thing. When I used to be on the plane with Trump, a few times we'd travel, he would always, he has a TV on the plane. And guess what he's watching 24/7? Fox News. He watches Fox all the time. And we'd be sitting there, and, look, Donald Trump, I love the guy, but this guy has an ego the size of the Grand Canyon, right? And so we'd be having these discussions, these sophisticated policy discussions, and every time Donald Trump's face would come on, the Fox, he'd say, shut up, I want to hear what they're saying about it. And I'm like, Donald, you're on every 2 minutes, what is this? And then every time Hillary would come on, it was so great. You'd go, she's lying, so what you see is what you get with Donald Trump.
Steve, people ask me, I've now going to 3 countries to try to explain Donald Trump to foreigners, which believe me is a challenge. I've been to Mexico, that was a tough sell. I've been to Canada, I'm going to Australia tomorrow, and his personality is unique. I've known him. I've not been on the plane during the campaign, but I've known Donald Trump for 28 years. He's the only human being I've ever met who has the extreme form of both kinds of ADD. He has an extreme form of children's ADD, which means you can't pay attention, and he has the extreme kind of adults ADD, which means you need attention. And he has both, which means whenever he sees his face, that tax plan, very, very interesting, Steve, very interesting.
I want to know,
Yeah, go ahead.
were the bathrooms on the plane really gold-plated?
Yes.
I got to tell you one other kind of fun. I mean, being on the plane was kind of fun. And Trump, look, Trump is larger than life. He is an amazing person to be around. I've always said, there's 4 politicians in my lifetime who just had that X factor that I was talking about. It was Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. It was just something about all 4 of those that they just had this connection with the American people. And I always say, of all 4 of those, Clinton was the best because he could figuratively and literally charm your pants off, right?
And I feel your pain.
Trump has that, and he on the plane. Though this was so fun. The first time I went on the plane, when you would travel with him, the man is inexhaustible. By the way, I've never seen anybody.
He
with
sleeps
energy.
4 hours a night.
He's incredible. I mean, I don't know if he's on uppers or what. We would leave LaGuardia Airport at 7 in the morning, typical day. We went from LaGuardia to Houston. He does 2 events in Houston. Then we go from Houston to Oklahoma City. He does a big rally in Oklahoma City. Then we fly to Colorado Springs. We came out here to Colorado. He does an event at the airport. And then we fly all the way back, and we get back to LaGuardia at like 1:30 in the morning. And he was doing that day after day after day. But my favorite story, so when you're doing these events with him, you never have a time to eat. There's just never any time left because you're just going to the event, you're doing the thing, and you're getting right back in the motorcade and going back. And so I thought the first time I was like, this is going to be great. The guy's a billionaire. He has his own plane. It's going to be caviar and lobster and, champagne. Every time we flew, the cuisine was always the same on the Trump airplane. Big Macs for lunch and Domino's Pizza for dinner. This guy just loves fast food. He's a man of the people.
Usually on tax day, we do some sort of celebration. We have Tax Freedom Day. Grover does a wonderful thing at ATR. But this year, it was the left that did something on tax. The left decided to have protests on tax returns. Let's go to what John said a year ago about tax returns.
Donald Trump is going to have to give up those tax returns. If he doesn't do it himself, the Obama IRS, which leaked Mitt Romney's tax returns in 2012, will leak them for him in October, just before the election. And I think a good standard, there may be others, is the tax returns. What in the world is he hiding? I think I know, but I'm not sure. If he won't give up those tax returns, I am submitting to you right now, his record of credibility and mood swings is such we cannot trust him with the nomination unless we verify his record. On that one, I really was wrong. I believe someone in the IRS did leak part of his tax returns in October. Remember that envelope, that blank envelope that arrived in the reporter's mailbox? Clearly, the alternative minimum tax forced Donald Trump to pay 25% rate. It became a nothing burger story. It's interesting he now wants to get rid of the alternative minimum tax. More power to him. I think it's been a mess. I was wrong about the tax returns because the American people are cynical about everything regarding politicians. I just will say this. I stand by this. For Donald Trump to have demanded the tax returns of all 20 people he was considering for vice president in order to prevent any political surprises, he demanded that Mike Pence and 19 other people surrender their tax returns while he was considering them for vice president. For him to do that, and at the same time refuse to release his own tax returns, there's a name for that in politics, and I think you know what it is.
Success.
This time, but I think it's a bad precedent because hypocrisy, it's one thing not to release your tax returns. That's a legitimate position. But to demand it of all 20 people who are going to work for you,
Will they ever get released?
no, of course not.
Quick thing about Mike Pence. One of my very few contributions in the campaign, I remember we were on the plane back in mid-July, And what when you're on the plane, Trump sits there, and you don't go up to him and talk to him. If he wants to talk to you, he'll call you over. And one time, just random, he said, "Hey, Steve, come on over here." And he said, it was an interesting conversation. He said, "Hey, what do you think about Mike Pence?" And I had known that he had met with Mike Pence a few days before. And I'll never forget, I said, "Well, God, Donald, I love Mike Pence. I mean, he's a great conservative. He's beloved by conservatives. When I ran the Club for Growth, he was the first candidate that we helped fund, and what a great investment that was." And he, I went on, and I said, "And by the way, Donald, if I were you, he would be my second choice for vice president." Well, of course, he said, who would be your first choice? And I said, "Well, John Kasich," because I said, "Donald, John Kasich is, from Ohio. You got to win Ohio to win. There's no path to victory without Ohio." And he turned to me and said, "No, too much bad blood between me and Kasich." And I said, "Well, look, Donald, John F. Kennedy picked LBJ, and they hated each other, And I said, you need Ohio. Pick John Kasich." He said, "No, it's not going to happen." So I said, "All right, well, if you can't pick John Kasich, pick Mike Pence." And I have no idea whether that had any impact. But is Mike Pence a great vice president or what? I mean, that guy is so spectacular, and I can't think of any better pick.
Mike Pence was a home run, I agree.
By the way, John Kasich would have been a complete disaster. Thank God he did not. I very seldomly admit I was wrong, but I was
By the
big
way,
time wrong
if you
about
go in the dictionary today and look up the word sour grapes, it says John Kasich. Look, Mike Pence was a home run, but let's not kid ourselves. Let's be honest with ourselves. Donald Trump called up Chris Christie and offered him the vice presidential nomination, and Christie said yes. For 18 hours, Chris Christie was the Republican nominee for, yes. For 18 hours, this is documented. For 18 hours, Chris Christie was the Republican nominee for vice president. Finally, some Trump family members and some Trump advisors who got wind of this said, "This is a disaster. Bridgegate trial is coming in October. Christie is unreliable." Yeah. They prevailed upon Trump, so Trump had to make the phone call. He called up Christie and said, "I'm retracting my offer." And Christie had to swallow that. Now, of course, he's going to get some consolation prize at some point. But I have to tell you, Donald Trump made a great call on Mike Pence, but it was only because he was willing to listen to his advisors after he made that call that he retracted it. I'll make you a bet. Chris Christie had been the vice presidential nominee, and the Bridgegate trial had been all over late October news. Donald Trump would not be president today.
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
You, a year ago, and this will be our last clip, really set the tone of the stakes of the election and what could happen around it. Let's watch this one.
I'm telling every single one of you, in this honeymoon period, I hope Donald Trump sobers up and becomes a more serious candidate. And he can win if he does that. Yeah. But if he doesn't, wait for the down ticket draft. Wait for the Colorado State Senate to go down. Wait for the U.S. Senate to go down. Wait for House members like Mike Kaufman to go down.
And I think you were right. If we had a good year, we had a great year. If Donald Trump didn't do this, what would have happened?
Well, to pick up on Steve's comment about what happened on election night and your comment, I think Donald Trump did sober up enough and Hillary Clinton hit the sauce.
So, this is an interesting point. I think, Steve Bannon is somebody I've gotten to know. And the left despises Steve Bannon, as you know. But Steve Bannon is a very, very smart guy. And he put together this vision. And I just kind of want to lay it out because I think it's so fascinating politically. What Steve Bannon saw out there was that there are kind of three factions now in American politics, not two. It's not liberal and conservative, but there's three factions. Liberals, conservatives, populists. Populists, who are not necessarily, a lot of populists didn't vote in a lot of elections. They were people who don't fall neatly into one category or another. They're not for free trade. They're not for immigration. They're for infrastructure spending. And what Bannon's vision was, and Trump glommed onto this, was to fuse together the kind of populist and the conservatives. And that was the strategy for winning. Look, I get so angry when I see these liberals say, well, gee, you didn't win the popular vote. We never set foot in California, New York, or Illinois. We never set foot. We knew we were going to lose. This was a 7-state election. It was always a 7-state election. We knew we had to win Florida and North Carolina, and then we were going to win Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin. By the way, did you see Donald Trump came within 5,000 votes of winning Minnesota? So we crashed through that, as I said on that tape, we did crash through that blue wall because Trump appeals to working class Americans. And that, I think, is so interesting, that kind of, and I actually love John's thoughts about this, because if we can hold that together, and incidentally, I love what you guys are doing with fossil fuels. Personally, I think the issue that is killing the left in the Democratic Party is this radical climate change nonsense, where they care more about, the rise of the ocean by 1/4 of an inch than coal miners. We would travel to these. Colorado's a coal-producing state, is it not?
It is, yes.
Well, we would go to places.
Well, it
like,
used to be.
Yeah, right. I mean, we go to West Virginia, we go to Ohio, we go to Pennsylvania, we would go to Virginia. We would visit these coal mining towns, and I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it was heartbreaking to see. Liberals love to say how much they care about working class people. You should see, John. We always talk about the effects of regulation on like $2 trillion, but I saw it firsthand when I went to these towns. Towns that used to have, maybe 20,000 people with, a coal plant, maybe a steel mill, were shut down, just eviscerated. And so where you had people working, now people were on unemployment benefits and on meth. It was horrible. And these leftists believe that, that climate change matters more than people's jobs. And damn it, you know what? These people, when Donald Trump said, we're going to return your jobs to you, people love that. And it's about time we put coal miners back in the jobs where they belong, because this country was built on coal.
Very briefly, when a party suffers a loss like the Democrats did, complete surprise, there's two things they can do. They can do what the British Labour Party did in the 1990s and rethink themselves anew. They can decide, why did we alienate moderate voters? Maybe we need to move to the center, as the British Labour Party did and finally elected Tony Blair for 3 terms. Or they can go hard left and say, we just didn't scream loud enough what our principles were. One of the problems the Democratic Party has is it has made the choice since the election. No cooperation with Trump on anything, including even infrastructure, and hard left. All of the Democratic nominees for these special elections, whether it's Kansas or Georgia or Montana, are former Bernie Sanders coordinators for those states. They have moved hard left. They're not going back. And I have to say, Donald Trump has made mistakes, but the biggest mistake that's been made since the election is the Democratic Party turning its back completely on middle America. When the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez, says there is no home, there is no place for anyone who has any pro-life sentiments whatsoever in the Democratic Party, that is an intolerant position. I call it a pup tent position, not the big tent position. They are shrinking their party's appeal, not expanding it.
I just want to, we're going to wrap this up, but I want to say that there are a lot of people who do commentation and reporting and analysts. These two gentlemen are not just guys you see on television and reading newspapers and magazines. They're actually in the trenches with the freedom movement. These are guys we rely on. These are guys we can call for advice, for insider information, to give them tips, and they work at this. And I'm just so honored that you guys were here tonight and part of what we do.
I'll be honored. Steve and I do not come back for repeat visits to think tanks that we don't think are effective, strong, and making a difference. And our presence here in the presence of all 500 people here tonight is a tribute to the effectiveness of the Independence Institute.
I want to I'll just second that emotion. I think that the Independence Institute and the great network of state think tanks around the country are going to be doubly important in the years to come, because one of the things that we're really focusing on in the Trump administration is returning power back to the states, whether it's health care, education, welfare, job training, just give it back to the states. And that's going to make what you're doing so much more important, because that means you're going to have to come up with solutions on healthcare, education reform, and so on. It's really critically important. And incidentally, look, there's ups and downs with Donald Trump all the time. I mean, sometimes I feel suicidal, and sometimes I feel like unbelievably happy. But when you get one of those moments, here's what I do. When I get one of those moments where I go, oh my God, why did we put this guy in the White House? I get on my knees and I say, thank you, God, that Hillary Clinton is not president of the United States.
We have a few more things to do, but let's have a thank you for Steve and John. Thank you both.